Four battalion-level formations lost cohesion almost at the same moment. What was supposed to be momentum turned into hesitation on the ground.
The point of rupture came when Ukraine's drone teams locked onto the flow of movement and broke it. The advance scattered. In seconds, the fight shifted upward. The air became the decisive layer of the battlefield. But this is only one part of the picture. Repair hubs, control nodes, and deeper logistical links also started to crack. The map is wider than it looks. We'll cut through it fast, but the first cut matters most. On that day, the Russian side deployed a force roughly equivalent to 4 battalions. On paper, that is not a small number. But the real signal was not in the size of the force, it was in how that force was used. There was no heavy armoured push creating pressure on the line. Instead, small detachments moved forward in civilian vehicles, motorcycles, and quad bikes. This choice alone reveals the nature of the operation. The goal was not to break through the front, but to slip through it. Move fast, get behind the line, create confusion, and disrupt the defender's reflex. Fog played into this plan. Low visibility weakens defence in the classical sense. But that logic only holds if defence depends mainly on eyesight. Along the Pokrovsk axis, the defence is no longer built around seeing, it is built around reading movement. A quad bike moving through terrain is not invisible, it is irregular. Small groups spreading across multiple routes at the same time do not disappear. They leave patterns behind. And patterns are exactly what drone teams are trained to detect. The real rupture on the ground happened at the natural choke points. As Russian units advanced at speed, they were forced to slow down at certain points. Roads narrowed, vehicles compressed, directions had to change. This was the moment the defence was waiting for. The objective was never to stop the attack at the first contact. The objective was to break its rhythm. Once rhythm is broken, speed stops being an advantage. When speed disappears, light units are left exposed. Ukraine intervened precisely at that threshold. FPV drones and munition dropping systems did not chase targets one by one. They cut the flow. Vehicles were disabled, movement stalled, groups were squeezed into tight spaces. What followed was not a conventional clash, but a rapid disintegration. By the end of the day, the picture was clear. Around 80 Russian soldiers were neutralized in the field. Only a small number managed to pull back, and some were captured. In practical terms, a force built around 4 battalions was rendered operationally ineffective. But the real issue is not the body count. The real issue is where these forces were lost. They were not destroyed by crashing into a fortified line. They were broken while trying to move forward. That means the problem is not the toughness of the defense, but the fact that the attack method itself no longer works. Light, fast, fog-supported infiltration is no longer a surprise on this line. And once something stops being a surprise, it stops being an advantage. Even though this looks like a single-day snapshot, it is part of a broader pattern. The Russian side is searching for a small but marketable success. Each failed attempt strengthens the defense a little more. The defense no longer guesses what will come. It reads how it will come. And that is more decisive than numbers. Looking at this only through frontline losses misses the deeper rupture. What broke that day was not just an attack, but a habit. The same method is being tried on the same line, and each time it is caught earlier. Russian command in the Pokrovsk direction is under 2 pressures. The first is time. This line no longer produces slow, predictable gains that can be sold later at a negotiating table. The second is perception. Even a small advance here can be framed as proof that we are still pushing. That is why attacks continue, fragmented, limited, stacked in small risks rather than one big gamble. The problem is that these small risks are no longer isolated. The Ukrainian defence reads them as a pattern of behaviour. That is why pressure is applied not only at the front, but also in the rear. The most fragile point on the Russian side is not the assault itself, but the ability to sustain it. Light vehicles are expendable, but they must be replaced. Drone operators are trained, but their control points are fixed. Repair hubs sit behind the line, but when they go dark, the front line feels it immediately. The overnight strikes on Russian repair sites were not random. They were aimed at the chain that allows commanders to say, "We try again tomorrow." If damaged vehicles cannot be returned to service, fast infiltration with light units remains an idea on paper. At the same time, Russia did not stand still. Around Hryshine, mechanized probes were attempted. This was an admission of sorts. When light infiltration failed, the instinct was to push with armour. But this too remained limited. Armoured units approached, made partial contact, and were pushed back. The platform changed. The outcome did not. The issue is not the vehicle, it is timing and method. A similar pattern had already played out around Yampil and nearby sectors. Snow, fog, low visibility, the same conditions, the same expectation. And again, the same result. The defence did not need to see the attack. It waited for it to form. When drone teams stepped in, the attack lost meaning before reaching the line. Taken one by one, these failures look small. Put together, they form a serious picture. Military assessments now converge on the same point. The light infantry attacks attempted on the Pokrovsk line have failed in the way many predicted. Multiple sources point to extremely unfavourable loss ratios for Russian units, in some estimates approaching 15-1. This is not just about numbers, it reflects a deeper problem. Low morale, rigid habits, and tactics that no longer produce results. This battlefield picture links directly to Moscow's wider problems. The war is no longer confined to the Eastern Front. Pressure is building on Russia's support networks abroad. Developments in Venezuela, for example, are not just political noise. They threaten an indirect support line Moscow could lean on. US sanctions and operational pressure in that theatre shake one of the external nodes Russia relies on, adding strain to its global supply web. At sea, another fracture is forming. Russia's so-called shadow fleet, used to move oil and gas under sanctions by masking routes and identities, is under growing pressure. Western enforcement and maritime control efforts are turning this into both a commercial and security problem. Analysts note that this fleet numbers in the thousands worldwide, and that multiple vessels have already been damaged or taken out of service. The impact is not symbolic. It slows flows, raises costs, and increases risk. At the same time, rising pressure on Iran narrows Russia's options even further. Either Moscow shifts to more expensive, riskier supply routes, or it cuts back on what it can sustain at the front. Signs of the second option are already visible. More light vehicles, less armour, more infantry, thinner support. This is not preference, it is constraint. The same constraint shows at sea. Tankers hugging the Turkish coastline in the Black Sea are not making a bold move, they are avoiding risk. Sea drones are no longer theoretical. When even a few ships are hit, the effect goes beyond damage. Insurance costs spike, routes change, speed drops. When speed drops, money arrives late. When money arrives late, pressure on the front increases. The chain works exactly like this. The overall situation remains complicated for both sides. But the pattern is clear. Pressure is no longer coming from one direction. It is arriving through multiple channels at once. We will continue to track how these strands connect and how they reshape the battlefield. For now, this concludes this assessment.